Okay, let's just dive right in with a huge question. What if the Roman Empire came back? Not as some historical reenactment, but as a brand new, modern day power. It is a wild thought, and the answer to how it could happen is probably not what you're expecting.
Because, see, this story doesn't start with armies marching or some charismatic leader giving speeches about glory. No, forget all that. It starts somewhere much darker, much more chaotic.
It begins when the world we know now simply breaks. It falls apart, leaving this massive void where the old powers used to be. And that's the setup for our whole story. The perfect storm, the catalyst that makes this incredible idea not just possible, but maybe even necessary.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the cracks that were already showing for years. Then, the massive storm that just shatters everything. We'll see how the existing system was totally paralyzed, how that led to an ancient idea being reborn, and finally, watch as the first dominoes start to fall. This is the origin story. All right, first things first. You have to understand, a catastrophe of this scale doesn't just happen out of the blue. It hits a structure that's already been rotting from the inside for decades. You know, for 30 years, the Mediterranean got hit with one stress test after another. You had the debt crisis that almost wrecked the euro, then the migration crisis that cranked up populist anger. Then the war in Ukraine completely changed the game on security. And the key thing is, these weren't separate problems. They were all just cracks spreading through the same fragile foundation. And underneath all those big geopolitical headlines, there was this deeply human crisis brewing. Just look at these numbers. Youth unemployment over 30% in places like Greece, Spain, Italy, year after year. That's not just a statistic, that's a social time bomb waiting to go off. And that's really the heart of it. You ended up with an entire generation of young people who felt completely abandoned by the system. No jobs, no real prospects, no belief that their countries had anything to offer them. And all that hopelessness, well, it's like a forest floor covered in dry tinder, just waiting for a single spark. And in 2026, that spark arrives. And it's not just one spark, it's a whole firestorm. A series of disasters that hit one after another, and they all feed into each other, setting the whole region on fire. It all kicks off with the climate, a brutal, unrelenting drought, the worst in 500 years. Can you even imagine? The very places that were the breadbasket of the ancient world, they just turned to dust.
And the immediate result? It's a nightmare. A 40% drop in wheat yields. Suddenly, food prices go through the roof, supermarket shelves are empty. This isn't some abstract problem anymore. It's a crisis, hitting every single family at the dinner table.
And right at that exact same moment, one of the region's most important players, Turkey, is in a complete economic nosedive. We're talking hyperinflation over 80%, its economy is collapsing, and its government starts getting desperate and aggressive, pouring pure geopolitical chaos on top of an already burning fire. There's actually a term for this, a polycrisis. It's when you don't just have one big problem. You have a bunch of huge, separate crises, climate, food, economic, political, and they all hit at the same time. They feed off each other, making everything worse, creating a spiral of chaos that's way, way more dangerous than any single part of it. So you're probably asking, where were the governments? Where was the EU? Well, right when they were needed most, the entire system just froze. The response was, frankly, a complete and utter failure. At the national level, governments were just paralyzed, caught up in their own squabbles, totally ineffective. And the European Union, an organization built for slow, careful decisions, it was just fundamentally incapable of dealing with a crisis that was moving at 1,000 miles an hour. There was a total power vacuum. But into that vacuum, something pretty incredible starts to bubble up. You know, when every modern solution has failed, people start digging into the past for answers. And an ancient idea starts to get new life, not from the top down, but from the ground up. This quote from the mayor of Rome in 2027 just nails the feeling at the time. Brussels has forgotten us. Our nations have failed us. It's a total rejection of the existing powers. It's a call to look inward, to a shared identity around the Mediterranean Sea that's way older than any modern country or the EU. And this wasn't just talk. It quickly turned into a real political movement. Local leaders, we're talking mayors and governors, the people actually dealing with food riots, they hold their own emergency summit in Rome. They literally go around their own national governments and propose something insane, a new Mediterranean confederation. A new union for a new, desperate world.
And the idea just explodes. Thanks to social media, hashtags like #NewRome are everywhere. For that generation we talked about, the one with no future, this wasn't just another political idea. It felt like a lifeline. It was a vision of unity and strength that felt exciting, powerful, and most of all, different. And really fast, all that energy online starts to spill into the real world. The idea escapes the internet and becomes a genuine mass movement on the streets, demanding real change right now. The very first domino to fall is Sicily. They're on the front lines of the food crisis. They feel completely abandoned by their own government in Rome, and so they vote, overwhelmingly, to join this new confederation. It's an act of pure desperation. Next up, Catalonia. They plug into their own long-running independence movement and see this new confederation as the perfect way out. For them, it's a path to a whole new kind of future. You can just feel the momentum building, right? And then comes the big one, the one that really makes everyone sit up and pay attention: Athens, the birthplace of democracy, votes, with a massive 79% majority to join a new union inspired by its old enemy, Rome. I mean, wow, that just shows you how bad things were and how powerful this new idea had become. By 2028, it's just unstoppable. A new government in Turkey, which had been rejected by Europe for years, now sees its future here. The Greek parliament makes it official. And then in Italy itself, the national government just crumbles under the pressure. It dissolves, and a new coalition that is all in on this new union wins the election. The idea is now a reality.
And just like that, from the ashes of the old world, a new power begins to rise. But here's the thing. An idea born in the fire of a crisis is one thing. Actually building a lasting, stable union, that's a whole other challenge. Can a dream born from pure desperation actually survive in the real world? Well, that is the question we'll have to tackle next time.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive what if. What if a modern Roman Empire was actually built? We're going to zero in on those crucial, foundational first few years between 2028 and 2030 to see how you'd even begin to build the architecture of a new superpower. Okay, so let's set the scene. You've somehow managed to unite an entire continent that was on the verge of total collapse. The revolution is over. Now comes the really hard part. How do you take that revolutionary idea and turn it into a real, functioning government for hundreds of millions of people? Let's get into it.
Well, every incredible building starts with a blueprint, right? And for this new Mediterranean Confederation, that blueprint was called the Mediterranean Charter. This was the document that was meant to be the absolute foundation for everything that came next.
Now, this charter, drafted back in 2028, was so much more than just a piece of paper with laws on it. It was really a promise to build a federal system that was rock solid on democratic principles and human rights. And maybe most importantly, a promise to learn from the mistakes of the past to build something stronger and more fair.
So, with that blueprint in hand, the architects of this new state got to work. They came up with this really interesting hybrid system of government, one designed to give everyone a voice, but also to be stable. Let's break down the main pillars. First up, you have the Senate of the Mediterranean. This was the upper house with 500 senators. Now, the number of senators a region got was based on its population, which makes sense. But, and this is key, they guaranteed a minimum number of seats for smaller regions. This was to make sure that huge players like Egypt or Turkey couldn't just run the whole show and ignore the smaller members. Then there's the Tribune Assembly, the People's Chamber. And this is where things get really fascinating. Its 200 members weren't elected from national parties like a Spanish party or an Italian party. No, they were elected from transnational party lists. So you, as a citizen, would vote for something like the Mediterranean Green Party, whose candidates came from all over the Confederation. It was a pretty radical design meant to force politics to think bigger than old national borders.
And for the executive branch, the people actually running the government day to day, they looked straight back to ancient Rome for inspiration. They created the Consular Council, a 7-member group with a presidency that rotated between them. This was the engine of the government, and it was carefully balanced to make sure all the different parts of this new state had a voice at the top.
So when you see it all laid out like this, you can really appreciate the balance they were going for. The Senate represented the regions, the Assembly represented popular ideas and movements, and the Council provided that steady executive leadership. Each branch had its own job to do and, crucially, had checks on the other's power to make sure no single part could get too powerful.
Okay, so you've designed this beautifully balanced government, but now you have a huge problem. Where do you put it? If you pick one single historic capital, say Rome, you're just going to make everyone else feel left out. So the architects came up with a really clever and symbolic solution.
Instead of one capital, they created four. Rome became the ceremonial heart and the home of the Senate. Istanbul became the economic capital, hosting the central bank. Alexandria got the popular Tribune Assembly, and Barcelona became the home of the Supreme Court. This was genius because it didn't just spread out the symbolic importance, it spread out the jobs, the money, and the prestige across the whole confederation.
Spreading out the political power was a great start, but a modern state can't run on symbolism alone. It needs a powerhouse economy to back it all up. You know, a state is just an idea without a strong economy, so let's look at how they built the financial engine of this new Rome.
Their first move was to introduce a new currency, the Mediterranean solidus, named after that legendary Roman gold coin. But this wasn't just clever branding. It was a chance to fix the massive, painful mistakes made by the Eurozone.
And here is the absolute game changer. Unlike the euro in its early days, the solidus was built from the ground up with what are called fiscal transfer mechanisms. That's a fancy term for something simple but powerful. It means that money would automatically flow from the wealthier regions to regions that were in a crisis. It was a real safety net, baked right into the currency itself, to stop the kind of economic disasters that almost ripped the European Union apart.
They also set up a huge common market, but this wasn't some kind of anything-goes free-for-all system. It was about creating fair markets. They put in strict rules to stop the super rich from hiding their money offshore. They created a minimum corporate tax across the whole confederation, and they even had a wealth tax specifically to fund development in the poorer regions. The goal was to prevent the kind of exploitation that had plagued other economic blocs.
And to physically connect everything, they launched what they called the Great Roman Works of the 21st century. I mean, how epic is that? These were massive infrastructure projects on a scale not seen in generations. Think high-speed rail all the way from Lisbon to Istanbul, a single renewable energy grid for the whole continent, and universal fiber optic internet. The idea was to literally knit the whole confederation together with steel and fiber.
But here's the thing. You can build all the institutions and railroads you want, but a nation needs more than that. It needs a soul, a shared identity. And this was probably the biggest challenge of all. How do you get people with centuries of different languages, cultures, and religions who've often been at war with each other to suddenly feel like they're part of the same team?
Instead of forcing one language on everyone, which would have been a disaster, their solution was this policy of pragmatic multilingualism. They revived Latin as a ceremonial language, a cool nod to their shared history. But for the actual business of government, they had 6 official working languages. The real secret weapon, though, was technology. They made perfect, real-time, AI-powered translation mandatory in every official meeting. It was a brilliant way to use modern tech to solve an ancient problem, letting all that diversity shine without creating division.
And a funny thing happened once you created that shared space. Politics itself started to change. The old national parties just started to feel small and kind of irrelevant. In their place, you saw the rise of these new, truly transnational movements. You had the new Roman Party, pushing for even stronger federal unity. You had the Mediterranean Liberal Alliance, focused on free markets. You had the Greens, focused on the shared climate crisis. For the first time, people were voting on big ideas that crossed all those old imaginary lines on the map.
So, we have a government, we have an economy, and we have the beginnings of a new identity. That leaves 2 final crucial pillars: a system to guarantee the rights of every single citizen, and a way to secure the state itself. Let's look at the institutions they built to do just that.
To protect individual rights, the Mediterranean Court was set up. This was the final say on all constitutional issues, the ultimate guarantor of the freedoms of religion, speech, and movement that were promised to every citizen in that original charter.
And for defense, they created the Mediterranean Legion, an initial force of 150,000 professional, all-volunteer soldiers. Now, it's really important to stress, this legion was not for conquest. Its entire mission was about maritime security, border control, and disaster response. It was designed to be a shield for the new state, not a sword to attack others.
So there you have it. An ancient dream, really, but reimagined with a completely modern design. The blueprint is incredibly ambitious, and it's a clear attempt to learn from all the successes, and more importantly, the failures of history. But the big question hangs in the air. With so much diversity, so much baggage, so many old wounds, could a superstate built this fast
forged in a moment of crisis, actually last.
All right, let's dive into one of the most incredible stories of economic transformation you'll ever hear. We're going to talk about a time when a whole group of nations, all connected by one sea and one massive crisis, tried to build an economic superpower basically from the ground up. I mean, seriously, think about that question. Can you build a global economic superpower in just 5 years? It sounds completely impossible, right? But believe it or not, between 2030 and 2035, that is exactly what the brand new Mediterranean Confederation tried to do. It was this unbelievably audacious goal that, frankly, nobody thought could work. Now, you might think they were starting from nothing, but that's not quite true. When they formed, their combined GDP was already a massive $8.5 trillion. That immediately made them the third largest economy on the planet, right behind the US and China. But here's the thing. Just being number 3 wasn't the plan. That was just the starting line. Their goal was so much bigger. The leadership was aiming for absolutely staggering growth. We're not talking about just improving things a little bit. They wanted to fundamentally redraw the global economic map. This wasn't about recovery. This was about dominance.
And what happened next was so fast and on such a massive scale that economists had to come up with a special name for it, just to capture how unbelievable it all was.
So how in the world did this miracle actually happen? Well, it wasn't luck. Not at all. It was a very deliberate top-down plan to completely rewire the economies of an entire region. Think about the huge rebuilding efforts after World War II. Now imagine that, but happening at hyperspeed. To really get how they pulled it off, we need to look at the blueprint. The whole transformation was built on 4 interconnected pillars, and each one was designed to take a historic weakness and flip it into a major strength. And the genius here was that they didn't just tackle one thing at a time. No way. They went after everything at once, creating a single market, achieving energy independence, revolutionizing their farms, and kicking off a huge boom in both tourism and technology. The idea was that success in one pillar would feed the others, creating this unstoppable chain reaction. So how do you kick something like that off? With money, a lot of money. We're talking $2 trillion. This huge stimulus, funded by their new shared currency, the solidus, was just poured into massive infrastructure projects. I mean, think about a high-speed train connecting Lisbon all the way to Istanbul, a single power grid for everyone. This wasn't just about building cool stuff, it was about creating millions of jobs, like yesterday. Okay, this part of the strategy was absolutely brilliant. They took one of their biggest, most painful vulnerabilities and attacked it head-on. For decades, the whole region was totally dependent on other countries for their energy. The plan was to flip that script completely. And you know what? The results were incredible. By harnessing all that sunshine in North Africa and the wind off the coasts, the region didn't just become energy self-sufficient. By 2034, they were actually exporting energy to other countries. That is a total game changer in global politics. At the same time, they leaned into what the Mediterranean does best: history and breathtaking beauty. With the internal borders gone, they created this thing called the Mediterranean Heritage Passport. It meant you could seamlessly travel from ancient Roman ruins to incredible Byzantine churches to stunning Islamic architecture, all in one easy trip. And the effect was just astonishing. 550 million. That's how many tourists were visiting every year by 2034. That's up from 300 million just 6 years before. This tourism boom got so big, it was generating 20%, a fifth of the Confederation's entire GDP. Okay, so we've talked about these huge projects and trillions of dollars, but what did all of this actually mean for the average person living there? Well, the impact was nothing short of transformative. This chart tells the most profound part of the story. The average unemployment rate got cut in half. But even more important, look at youth unemployment. In some places, it had been over 40%, a disaster that was stealing an entire generation's future. It plummeted to 15%. All of a sudden, young people had hope. They had opportunity. And that created what they called the human dividend. You know, the brain drain where all a country's smartest, most talented people have to leave to find work somewhere else? Well, it went into reverse. The engineers, the doctors, the entrepreneurs who had left for jobs in America or Northern Europe, they started coming home. And they came back not just for a job, but because they wanted to be part of building this incredible new future. But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? This golden age wasn't perfect. When you create this much change this fast, you don't just solve old problems. You end up creating a whole bunch of new ones. And right here, you can see the fundamental tension at the heart of the miracle. On one side, you have all this incredible success, growth, jobs, prosperity for millions. But on the other side, a shadow was growing. A widening gap between the rich and poor, new social conflicts, and pushback from people who felt threatened by all the change.
A major fault line started to crack open between the wealthier northern regions and the still developing southern and North African areas. The folks in the north who were paying a lot of the bills started to get resentful about all the money being sent south to build things up, and that sparked some serious political backlash.
And the challenges just kept popping up. The new freedom to move anywhere for a job meant cities like Barcelona and Milan were flooded with new workers, straining housing and public services. Their new currency, the solidus, actually got too strong, which started to hurt their own companies trying to stuff abroad. And of course, with all this new industry and farming, you had huge fights breaking out over land, water, and pollution. So all of this leads us to the ultimate question. The Confederation had built something truly incredible, something that defied all expectations. But was it actually built to last? Or were the cracks in the foundation already starting to spread? In the end, it's a classic paradox. The very policies that sparked this unbelievable boom were now putting the unity of the whole superstate to the test. It was like they had solved one set of existential problems, only to create a completely new one. And that's the question that would come to define everything. Was the Mediterranean miracle a real, sustainable model for the future? Or was it just a brilliant, beautiful, but totally unsustainable flash in the pan that was really just the beginning of a whole new set of troubles? Answering that question, well, that would dominate their next and much more turbulent decade. Have you ever wondered what would happen if the Roman Empire came back? Not with, emperors and chariots, but as a modern-day confederation. Well, in this explainer, we're going to jump into that exact scenario. We're imagining a world where, by the year 2040, a reunited Mediterranean isn't just a thing, it's a full-blown global superpower. So here's how we'll break it down. First, we'll get a sense of the sheer size of this new player on the block. Then we'll look at how it flexes its military muscle, how it completely upends the global diplomatic game, and the very unique way it chooses to lead. And finally, we'll see what this new world actually looks like. Let's start with the money, because that always talks. By 2035, this is way more than just some regional alliance. We are talking about an absolute economic titan, with GDP of $12 trillion. Right out of the gate, it's playing in the big leagues with the largest economies on the planet. And get this, it's home to 450 million people. Now that is not just a number on a spreadsheet. Think about what that means. A massive internal market, an incredible pool of talent, and a demographic weight that gives it a powerful voice in any global conversation. So just look at this comparison. You can see the Confederation isn't some junior partner asking for a seat at the table. No, it's a heavyweight right from day one. It instantly joins that top tier of great powers, forcing every other country on Earth to completely rethink its strategy. Okay, so when you're that big, you've got to be able to protect yourself, right? You need to project some serious strength. So how does it pull that off? Well, it all begins with locking down what was once called Mare Nostrum, or Our Sea. On paper, it has a very advanced military force called the Mediterranean Legion. But its real hard power, the kind that makes everyone else sit up and take notice, comes from its complete and total control of the world's most vital maritime choke points. When you hold the keys to Gibraltar, the Suez Canal, and the Turkish Straits, you basically hold the keys to global trade itself. So you've got this incredible military and strategic leverage. But what do you actually do with it? I mean, it's one thing to have a big stick, it's another thing entirely to know how, and more importantly, when to use it. And this is where the global chess game gets fascinating. The rise of the Confederation doesn't just add one more piece to the board, no way. It creates a brand new center of gravity, and every other major power is suddenly forced to adjust its footing. Just look at a country like Russia. Almost overnight, its crucial naval access from the Black Sea out to the wider world is completely dependent on the Confederation's goodwill. Its sphere of influence just evaporates. The source material suggests it's even forced to pull out of its key bases in Syria by 2038. And just like that, its ambitions in the region are pretty much over.
What the Confederation gets really good at is playing a careful balancing act. It creates this special partnership with NATO, so it's a strategic ally, but not a full member, which lets it keep its independence. It also stays deliberately neutral in the big US-China rivalry, refusing to be a pawn in their game. And in the Middle East, it becomes the Gulf's #1 trading partner, totally redrawing the economic and political map of the region. And it doesn't just use this influence for itself, it actually starts mediating some of the world's toughest conflicts. By using its economic leverage and its position as a trusted power in the region, it manages to do something nobody else could. It brokers the first preliminary Israeli-Palestinian peace talks by 2039. But here's what's really interesting. Its power isn't just about military might or diplomatic deals. The Confederation builds its influence in a totally different way, by taking the lead on the biggest challenges facing the entire planet. We call this soft power. It's basically influence you earn because of the magnetic pull of your culture, your values, and your ideas, not because you forced anyone to do anything. It's about making other countries want to follow your example. Climate change becomes its absolute signature issue. It sets this incredibly aggressive goal of being carbon neutral by 2045, way ahead of the other major powers. And this isn't just for PR points. The Mediterranean is on the front lines of climate change. We're talking rising seas, desertification, you name it. For them, leading on this isn't a choice, it's a necessity. It also completely rewrites the book on migration. Instead of the old fortress model, it builds a new one based on partnership. It creates legal routes for people to come for work, it invests in development with African nations, and it tackles the root causes of why people feel they have to leave in the first place. It's a model built on cooperation, not confrontation. And all of this global leadership is supercharged by a massive cultural boom. Think about it. That rich, shared heritage that mixes European, North African, and Middle Eastern influences, it just explodes onto the world stage through movies, universities, and art. The source material actually calls it a new Mediterranean cultural renaissance. So let's pull all the way back now and look at the final picture. By the year 2040, the world we used to know is basically gone. The entire geopolitical map has been redrawn, and there's no going back. The old order has crumbled. That period of American dominance, it's officially over. China now faces a powerful new competitor in key zones across Africa and the Middle East. Russia has been pushed back from the Mediterranean. What we have now is a truly multipolar world, where global power is spread out more than it has been in a very, very long time. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? A new superpower is on the scene, one born not from war, but from shared crisis and cooperation. Does its arrival make the world a more balanced and stable place? Or does it just create a brand new arena for the next great power conflict?
So picture this. It's the year 2040, and the Mediterranean Confederation is an absolute global powerhouse. I mean, this thing was born from a perfect storm of crises and managed to do what everyone thought was impossible, uniting dozens of completely different cultures all around the Mediterranean into one single, thriving entity. It was a modern marvel, truly. But after a decade of just incredible success, a really dangerous question started bubbling to the surface. Could this miracle actually last?
And this quote right here, this is the absolute key to understanding the whole story. The very prosperity and stability that the Confederation worked so hard to create, well, it started to eat away at the bonds that held it all together. You know, that common enemy, total collapse, was gone. And with that threat gone, some very old ghosts started to stir. And make no mistake, the success was absolutely staggering. We are talking about the world's third largest economy, complete energy self-sufficiency, a cultural renaissance that was the envy of the world. The Mediterranean miracle wasn't just some catchy slogan, it was a daily reality for 450 million people. And this is the incredible height from which the Confederation was about to teeter.
So, how does a golden age start to tarnish? Well, it's kind of simple, really. Once the daily fight for survival is over, people have a lot more time to think about other things. Things like identity, history, and a lot of old grievances. The calm of prosperity didn't heal those old divisions. Nope, it just gave them room to breathe again, to re-emerge with a new and really dangerous intensity.
And the very first crack in that beautiful facade was the return of nationalism. Suddenly in Turkey, you have this powerful neo-Ottoman movement arguing that the Confederation is just diluting Turkish greatness. In Egypt, people start asking, hey, why are we sharing our sovereignty with our former colonial powers? And it wasn't just in the south. Catalan and Sicilian separatists, who had been pretty quiet, just redirected all their old anger from Madrid and Rome to the new federal capital. It turns out that a shared Mediterranean identity was still a pretty fragile idea when you put it up against centuries of national history.
The next big fault line? Faith. See, the Confederation was built on a very strictly secular model. It had to be to manage all that incredible diversity. But that neutrality started coming under fire from both sides. You had conservative Christian groups and conservative Muslim groups, both demanding that their faith should play a much bigger role in law and public life. And this friction just exploded in 2045 with a series of absolutely horrific terrorist attacks, which just ripped society apart in these bitter debates over the Confederation's very soul.
So beyond these deep social divisions, there were fundamental, systemic stresses that began to test the integrity of the entire Confederation. The very architecture that had made the miracle possible was now starting to buckle under its own weight.
Okay, what's so fascinating about this is the irony. A core idea of the Confederation was this system of fiscal transfers, basically wealthier northern regions helping to develop the South. A great idea on paper, right? But by the 2040s, it was a source of deep, deep resentment. The North felt like it was just bankrolling the South, while the South felt controlled and patronized by all these economic policies being imposed from far away. The very tool that was designed for unity was now driving a massive wedge right between them.
And this chart just perfectly illustrates the demographic time bomb that was ticking away. You had aging populations in places like Italy, Greece, and Spain, creating these huge pension and healthcare burdens. Now, this was offset by young workers migrating from North Africa and Turkey, which seemed like a perfect solution. But that solution created its own massive problem, a huge social backlash. And then, when demographic projections in 2048 predicted a Muslim majority across the Confederation by 2075, it triggered absolute political panic among conservative groups.
50,000. Then came the unavoidable, brutal reality of climate change. In 2047, a single, catastrophic heat wave killed 50,000 people. This was no longer some abstract threat for the future. It was a visceral, devastating here-and-now event. Water shortages pitted farmers against cities, and rising seas began that slow, heartbreaking process of abandoning coastal areas like Venice. The environmental bill was coming due, and it was becoming unbearable.
And as if all those external pressures weren't enough, the system was just rotting from within. Those grand infrastructure projects that were once a symbol of unity, they became synonymous with corruption and kickbacks. Political families created dynasties, passing seats in the Senate between cousins and kids. Public trust in the Confederation's institutions, the essential glue holding everything together, was just evaporating.
Right, so all of these simmering tensions, the nationalism, the religion, the economic gaps, the social fears, they were all about to boil over in one single political crisis, an event that would push the entire experiment to the absolute brink of collapse, the succession crisis of 2049. And while the Confederation was busy tearing itself apart, the world's other great powers saw a golden opportunity. A new America First administration in the US demanded it pick a side against China. China, not taking that lightly, launched targeted economic attacks. And all the while, Russia was just pouring gasoline on the fire with disinformation campaigns designed to amplify every single separatist movement. The Confederation was literally being attacked from within and from without at the same time.
This was the terrifying question on everyone's mind in 2049. The executive branch, the consular council, needed to elect a new leader. But in a climate of such deep, bitter division, consensus was totally impossible. The engine of the empire had just stalled out, leaving the entire state dangerously adrift in a storm.
Let's just walk through how fast this unraveled. For 6 agonizing months, there was zero leadership. In month 1, the Italian, Turkish, and Egyptian blocs completely deadlocked the election. By month 3, the military's entire command structure was in chaos. By month 4, regional governors started just ignoring the federal government and making their own laws. And by month 6, the financial markets lost all confidence, and the currency, the solidus, plummeted. This wasn't just a political crisis anymore. It was a full-blown systemic meltdown.
At the last possible second, a resolution was found. A compromise candidate from Tunisia, someone who didn't belong to any of the major blocs, was finally chosen. But the crisis was a brutal wake-up call. Here's the crucial point. They hadn't actually solved the problem. They had just slapped a Band-Aid on it. That 6-month deadlock revealed deep, terrifying cracks in the Confederation's very foundation.
And this brings us to the year 2050. The Confederation has survived, but just barely.
It's scarred, it's divided, and it's facing a profound identity crisis. The dream of a new Roman Empire is on life support, and it now stands at a historic and very uncertain crossroads.
So as we look at the year 2050, the Confederation is facing 4 huge existential questions that are going to define its entire future. First up, identity. After all this, can a new shared ideal really win out over the powerful pull of centuries of nationalism? The answer there decides if they're one people or just a temporary alliance. Then, the economy. Can they finally bridge that gap that creates so much resentment between the rich North and the developing South? Then you've got governance. Can the central government ever be reformed to regain the trust of its own citizens? Because without that legitimacy, the whole thing is hollow. And finally, the environment. With the climate crisis no longer a future threat but a devastating present, can they actually muster the collective will to act? This isn't just about politics, it's about pure survival.
Which leaves us with this final, haunting question. After achieving what everyone thought was impossible, is the Mediterranean Confederation an enduring, new model for the future, or is it doomed to be just another echo of history, another great and powerful empire that simply fractured and collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions?